Here's the new Bartos Flur module from Frequency Central, which will take CV signals and split those across 8 stages of trigger or gate outputs. I'll go through the features and then create a few patches to demonstrate some ideas with the module. First, I'll look at the features of the module, and what we can do with this is to start without anything actually plugged in. We've got a trigger and a gate switch and 2 inputs. The first input is unipolar and the second input is bipolar. Both of these work as offsets when no input is present. Changing the gate to trigger, you can see the LEDs indicate a short trigger on each step change rather than a held gate. Taking an LFO from the ultra wave, you can see the ramp wave moving through the steps. Here's a saw wave. This can be attenuated to move across a smaller range, and you can also offset that. Here's a triangle which will ping pong back and forth. Here's some noise which fluctuates all over the place. And here's some sample and hold giving some random values. Moving to a ramp wave, I've started my kick drum playing with a steady clock, and the same trigger source, which is that clock triggering the kick drum, is also going into the ultra wave to sync the LFO in time. And then I'm going to use the LFO to control the Bartos Flur in time with a kick. You can see step 1 is in time with a kick and hitting. Taking some triggers out, I'll use the Bartos Flur to trigger some hi-hat patterns. Depending on the attenuation settings, we can generate new rhythms with swing, shuffle or triplets in there. If these sounds were gates, the 2 steps that are next to each other would merge as that gate is fully held until it moves to the next step. To further demonstrate that, I'll put the cables into the first 3 outputs, which will all merge together as one when they're all set to gates. But as short triggers, each stage will still trigger that hi-hat sound. Here I'm taking the System X sample and hold clock output into a sequencer, and taking the sequencer's output into the second input on the Bartos Flur. Usually you'd be putting a sequencer into the top control, which works at 0 to 5 volts, but this particular sequencer that I'm using actually works bipolar in terms of -5 volts up to +5 volts, working both positive and negative. As I start moving my sequencer step values around, we can start to generate new drum rhythms as those CV address the 8 stages on the Bartos Flur. So each step is now sending a voltage to CV address those steps. Here's changing the voltages on the sequencer. And if I take the last 4 steps in the sequence up to a higher value, you can see that those all go up to the 8th output on the Bartos Flur. But I'm using this just to trigger the first 4 outputs, so I'm going to stick with lower voltages. You could of course attenuate your signal coming in on the module so you'd only affect a smaller range. So by changing sequencer step voltages, you can turn the Bartos Flur into a drum generating device for a drum sequencer or trigger sequences. Before plugging anything in, I'm just going to use the LEDs to indicate what's going on. I'm going to use the module as an envelope stage addressing unit. I say that because we're going to address the different stages in the envelope, which will trigger different parts of the Bartos Flur. So I've got an envelope going into the module on the blue stackable, and I'm just manually triggering that envelope. I've set the peak of the envelope and scaled that with the attenuator so it just reaches step 8. The envelope is currently just full sustain, no attack, no decay, no release. Turning up the attack and re-triggering, you can see that attack slowly rise up through the 8 steps. Here's a slightly faster attack. And now some release, so you'll see those LEDs move down at the end as well. Turning down the sustain, you'll see the envelope will peak, come down with the speed of the decay, and then sustain at a lower voltage level. Taking off all the release, this will mean the envelope just shoots down to nothing as soon as you let go of the sustain. So I'm going to take a slow LFO, square wave LFO, to trigger my envelope and change that shape of the envelope as that plays. So you can see a fast attack swelling up and then the sustain holding as well. I've currently got a patch set up with Mutable Instruments braids in pluck mode, and I'm actually going to trigger that sound from stage 5 on the Bartos Flur. So when the envelope goes past or goes back down to stage 5, you get this double trigger because it hits as it attacks and the envelope rises up, and then also as it steps back down as well. If I take off the release, it won't pass through stage 5 again and will only trigger as the attack voltage rises. Here's a slower attack and you can see stage 5 strike and still hear that sound triggering. So the pitch sequence is separate and it's clocked from the System X sample and hold, which you can see to the left of the video. I'm going to take step 8's output and I'll trigger a separate sequencer from that. So each time I hit step 8, that's going to move through a step on a different sequencer, which is controlling the timbre of the patch, which in this instance translates to the length of those plucked sounds coming from braids. I'll also use stage 1 to trigger a white noise hit. So you can easily split up the stages of an envelope and trigger different things. For the last patch, I'll look at creating random triggers with a Bartos Flur. I've got the ultra wave set to sample and hold, and using that to control the module, you can see it split those random voltages across the 8 outputs. I'm going to use step 5 to trigger a percussion sound. And I've also got a patch set up which is taking the same sample and hold, which is the CV input, to go and control the timbre of a wavetable and move those waves so you can hear that in the background as well. Adding another trigger, let's say from stage 7, to move a sequencer with each step. That's going to change the pitch, which is going into a quantizer first, affecting this background wavetable sound. And as there's 2 inputs, we can of course mix these, so let's add a triangle LFO. And then I'm going to take stage 2's output and trigger an envelope, which is opening up a VCA for the wavetable sound. So this sound is still moving in the background, but now it's only going to trigger when that envelope opens that VCA. So it's speeding up the sample and hold. I'm going to take the clock output from the System X sample and hold module, and you can see that with each clock pulse, which is a high value, the Bartos Flur is working as we've known through the rest of the video it's on, meaning that it's letting the sound through and working as we've seen. But when the clock value is low, in between those clock pulses, the output is frozen. That doesn't turn the output off, but it just holds the previous step. So Speeding up the clock, you can get faster random bursts. And when the clock input isn't present, it works with seeing the rest of the video where this is normal to a high value, working as normal. So the Bartos Flur is a great way of generating triggers from CV sources to generate and further your patches. Check out the other Frequency Central videos on my page, hit like and subscribe for more videos coming every week. And finally, check the Patreon link in the description if you want to support the channel.